I had someone who I didn't know reach out to me the other day, which doesn't happen all that often, but what they wanted was very atypical and, to be honest, very refreshing. The reason I say that is because what they wanted was maintenance work done to their mower, which I don't get calls for very often. But after talking to them, I soon realized that they knew exactly what they wanted, and what they wanted was not what your average owner cares about. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this Toro lawnmower, and the problem is that the owner wants their mower to last as long as humanly possible. In short, they want me to do the maintenance on it, that way they won't have to buy a new mower, which if you hadn't noticed are now almost as expensive as some of the battery electric mowers. Now, I'm going to try and repair this mower, but yours might be different, so this might not work on yours. So if things are not working out for you, like in the video, please ask about it. I'll be glad to answer your questions. So why do I consider this repair atypical? Well, most times I'll get a call about someone's mower not starting or it's broken down, and the main reason why is because the maintenance has never been done on it. In this case, they're asking me to work on a running machine that's not broken, so you can see how this is not my typical call for help. But before we do all this work, I would like to get a baseline for a pull test just to see if any work that we do to the wheels has helped out in any way. Now, as you can see, with a reading of only 1.2 kilograms, this mower is very easy to push around to begin with, so why should I even bother with the wheels then? Now that's pretty simple to explain. If you want this mower to keep being easy to push around for the foreseeable future, it's best to keep the wheel bolts cleaned and lubed. That way the dirt that's going to collect on the bolts won't destroy the wheel openings, and there'll be less of a chance for them to get stuck in the future. Now, of course, you don't have to remove the wheel to do this job, but taking them off will allow you to clean the bolt before adding your lube, and it'll make it work even better than just spraying lube around the bolt. Now, the non-driven wheels are easy to do, and you typically won't have any issues with them, but it's the driven wheels that'll have the problems, and I would definitely recommend taking them off to clean them instead. Now, it's okay if you don't want to polish them to a mirror finish, but taking off all that old grime that's covering the bolt will do wonders. I would also recommend applying a lot of lube to where the drive axles are being supported at, just to keep them from having problems in the future as well. Now, I don't recall ever seeing these extra steps being mentioned in the owner's manual, but then again, I don't think they ever wanted these mowers to last 20 years either. In fact, most of the maintenance besides the obvious oil change is basically making sure that everything that moves, slides, and anything that makes contact with another part stays lubricated and moving. Now, it's kind of strange to me, but to me, I treat this mower more like an older car from 100 years ago, where it basically makes sure all the moving parts are lubricated to keep them from wearing out. Now, you might be asking yourself why I'm taking the top cover off as part of maintenance, and that's because I need to get to the flywheel. And I'm doing it for two reasons. First, I want to do a compression test, and I want to spin the engine over with the drill to overcome the compression release, which is there to make it easy to pull the engine over by hand, but it will interfere with getting an accurate reading during the test. Now, we want to see a reading well over 150 psi, and the higher the better. And anything lower than that just means the engine has some wear on it. However, we do not want to see a reading lower than 60 psi because it means the engine has a serious problem with it. So what if we end up with a reading in the 90s then? Well, it means your engine has a fair amount of wear on it, but it should still run. However, you are going to be down on power, which means cutting tall, thick grass might be a bit difficult, and the engine might stall when going through it. Now, while I have the spark plug out of the engine, I'm also going to check that the gap is close to where it needs to be, which luckily it is on this one. And after spinning the engine over for about 5 seconds, we ended up with a reading of about 155 psi, which is extremely good. And what that means is this engine is in excellent condition, and these last 5 years of use has not hurt it in any way. Now, unfortunately, the next part of the maintenance is the part that most people seem to forget to do, and to be honest, it makes sense. Since this is an overhead valve engine, you need to inspect the valve lash once in a while, which is a fancy way of saying we need to check the clearance between the rocker arm and the tappet on top of the valve stem. For this part, I'm going to do it the easy way, which is to turn the engine until one of the rocker arms is all the way down. Then I'll check the clearance on the loose rocker arm, which for us will be the bottom one. Now, the clearance here should be about 5/1000 of an inch, but after this many years without being checked, I doubt it's going to be even close. In fact, it's much too loose. So I'll just keep doing this until I find a feeler that fits in the clearance and barely drags in between the rocker arm and the tappet. Now, you'd think that I would just try the next size over, but instead, to save time, I'm going to jump a couple of sizes, and only then, when I find one that doesn't fit, I'll work my way back down until I find the one that does. To be honest, you would think this would take a long time, but after you get a rhythm going, it's surprising how little time it takes to find the right one that fits. So it looks like we finally found the one that won't fit. Next, we'll work our way back down, and I'm pretty confident that the 11 thousandths feeler should just barely fit. And it looks like I was correct. As you can see, the rocker arm is even moving with the feeler, which means it's dragging against it and the tappet. That means the clearance here is several thousandths off from where it needs to be, and it'll need to be adjusted to go back to spec. Now before I do that, I'm going to rotate the engine to check on the clearance for the top rocker arm, but you're welcome to make your adjustment to the first arm if you want to. I'm doing it this way because I want to find out what the clearances are first before I make any adjustments. Now the clearance for the upper rocker arm was not as far off as the bottom one, which I guess is good to know. Next, I'll get my 5 thousandths of an inch feeler ready, and after loosening both jam bolts, I'll then start making my adjustments. To make the adjustment, put the feeler into the clearance and then turn the adjusting nut until the feeler just barely gets stuck between the rocker and the tappet. After that, while holding the adjusting nut, tighten the jam bolt and then double check the clearance again, and then rotate the engine to work on the other rocker arm. Now after that's done, simply do the same procedure to this rocker arm like we did to the last one. Now why is it so important that we check and make adjustments to the clearance then? Well, the answer is pretty simple. If the clearance gets too far off, it could affect how the engine starts and runs, to a point that if the clearance gets so big, the pull rope will get yanked right back out of your hand. So the big question is, how often should you check the valve lash on one of these engines then? Well, if it were up to me, I'd check it every couple of years. But it's really based on how much time the engine's been running since the last time it was checked. So if it's been 4 years since you got it out of the box, but you've only used it for 10 hours, then no, I wouldn't check it. However, if you got one of these to do commercial yard mowing and it's going to look like you're going to exceed 100 hours in the first year, then I would certainly check it more often. That means you're going to have to decide when you think it needs it based on how much you use it. Also, when replacing the engine oil, you can use whatever the owner's manual recommends, or you can choose a different type. The most important part of changing the oil is adding the correct amount. Put too little in and you could damage the engine. So you might be thinking that adding more oil than you should would be better, but adding too much oil is also not recommended either. I'll typically pour in about half a bottle, and that's pretty close to the full mark, but I'm still going to check it just to make sure it's not too much. So I've been asked how often I replace my air filters and also my spark plugs, and the answer is simple: when I need to. I do not replace them unless they look as though they need it, but what do I mean by that? Well, the air filters can typically be cleaned by just tapping them against a hard object. This will loosen any grass and dirt from them. And only when the filters are dark with dirt or wet with oil will I even consider replacing them. Of course, if you've seen my other videos where I'm getting a mower ready for sale, I will change it then, only because I use it as a selling point in the ad. Now as for the spark plug, I will typically change it if I'm having a starting or running issue that I need to fix, and I need to rule out the plug as the reason why it's not running correctly. Of course, if you feel as though you need to change both the spark plug and the air filter each and every year, you're certainly welcome to. But as for me, I find that time and money better spent on just changing the oil instead. Like I mentioned earlier about keeping items lubricated, that also applies to the brake and self-propel cables too. Now these are often overlooked when leaving mowers outside in the weather. That's because rainwater can work its way into the cable and cause rust to form in them. After that's done, and before we try and start the engine, I want to try and do another pull test just to see if we were able to improve on that amazing reading we got before we cleaned and lubricated the wheel bolts. And it looks like our new reading is an even better one at an amazing 1 kilogram, which has to be a new record for me, at least when it comes to a self-propelled mower, of course. So it looks like it starts rather easily, even with the soft pull, which is great news. You shouldn't have to be a bodybuilder to start one of these. Of course, we also need to know if it's easy to start when the engine's hot as well. So it would seem that it starts just like it should, whether hot or cold, and it's even easier to push around, which will really help out when it's 100 degrees outside. I can't stress how important it is to do some basic maintenance on your mower, only if it's to keep you from having to shell out half a grand of your hard-earned money every couple of years to replace it. All you have to do is check your oil once in a while, and more often if you can. Yes, you can go too far, just like it did in this video, but it's only benefiting you in the end. And as much as I like fixing stuff that's not working, I find it better, at least for the owners, if I'm just doing basic maintenance on their mowers instead of hardcore surgery. Then again, it is your choice if you want to neglect your stuff, but at least this time, this owner cared enough to give it to someone to do the work for them. So here's my thought. I'd rather pay a small amount of money each and every year to keep my mower working well versus having to replace it every 5 years. So my question is, are you willing to pay a small amount of money now to maintain that mower to keep it from breaking down, or would you just rather wait until the mower starts having problems instead? Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.